I think sometimes we overthink creativity, and sometimes it's better to simplify it. We've been on a bit of a hiatus from our creative bootcamp, but we're on to challenge number 7. And it's going to go in the sketchbook that I mostly filled with Andrea on my trip, but there were a couple pages we didn't get to. But I'm okay with that because we had a ton of fun, and now we get to fill one of these pages together. Grab your watercolors and give them a spritz. The essence of this challenge is going to be to paint the same thing 3 different times, and each time we paint it, we're going to add on a constraint so that we're forced to simplify things. I'm going to do a mandarin with the leaves on it because I think they're so pretty like that. The goal of this first part of the exercise is to just paint them however comes naturally to you, including how long it takes you. And I started with mine with just kind of a blob shape that I filled with a bunch of different oranges, yellows, and then I concentrated purples and darker reds around the edges. And then I kind of lifted out some of the color from the areas that would be highlighted. On the top, I added in a stem or kind of a branch, and some of these leaves, once that base layer of the blob dried, it was a little bit more dull than I wanted it to be. So I did make sure it was really dry, and then I did a bit of a glaze on the top with a really bright orange and a little bit of yellow. And then one of the things I love to do is use a white gel pen to add in the details. Working at a pace that was comfortable to me, this took me 7 minutes to do. Remember that your time may differ than what mine is. Once you do your first one though, I want you to take that time and I want you to cut it in half, and we're going to paint it again. Because I only had half the amount of time, I was trying to be more intentional about my color placement in my initial layer and being a little bit more bold because I didn't want to have to take the time to do the glazing layer, but that ended up taking me more time than I expected, so I knew I wasn't going to have time for those pen details, so I got a little more aggressive with lifting out some of the highlights, and there are parts of this one that I actually like a little bit better than the one I spent a little longer on because of those highlights. And the constraint helped me see that. Now for the final part of this challenge, we're going to add a different constraint. You're not going to be limited on time, but you're going to be limited on the number of brush strokes you use. If you're doing the same painting as me, I want you to limit it to 10 brush strokes. I'm a little scared too. If you're doing something a little more complicated, you could add a couple on, or if the subject you chose is a little bit more simple than this, I want you to do it in 5. I love doing exercises like this where we introduce constraints for a few reasons. Number 1, sometimes it can actually show you when it's best to simplify things. There are things about the ones that are more simple that I find a little more striking than the one that I worked at my own pace. And that tells me that sometimes I'm overthinking things. But the other reason I love working with constraints is, for me, it kind of takes away some of the burden of producing good results. Because if things don't turn out how I want them to, it's not completely my fault. Part of it is the constraint that I was working within. And so it allows me to explore and be free without the expectation of things being exactly how I want them to be.